The billionaire's son pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his little brother, then at me, a sneer twisting his handsome features. "You think you can understand him? A waitress?" His sycophantic friends erupted in a chorus of cruel laughter. But when I finally knelt down and communicated with the silent boy, the entire palatial restaurant fell into a stunned hush. What happened in the next 5 minutes didn't just expose a secret that would cost the heir his fortune. It would shatter the Sterling family dynasty and rebuild it from the ashes of its own arrogance. My name is Clara May Thompson, and I'm 24 years old. I exist in the spaces between other people's lives. My world is a 5th-floor walk-up in Queens, where the scent of my neighbor's cooking is a permanent resident, and the radiator clangs like a death row prisoner rattling his cup. I don't have a sprawling family tree. It's more of a sapling. It's just me and my grandmother, Nana Rose, who resides in a state-funded nursing home that always smells faintly of bleach and regret. My life is a carefully balanced equation of rent, utilities, Nana's supplemental medical costs, and the occasional splurge on a pint of ice cream that I eat directly from the carton while standing in front of my open freezer. It's a life lived on the knife's edge of solvency, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that never quite fades. My theatre of operations is Aria, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. It's a place of hushed tones, crystal glasses that cost more than my couch, and patrons who treat the staff as functional and, preferably, invisible furniture. For 3 years, I've navigated this world of performative wealth. I've mastered the art of the unobtrusive pour, the silent clearing of plates, the smile that conveys deference without subservience. It's a degrading ballet, and I am one of its most practiced dancers. The other waitstaff tolerate me. They call me the Ghost because I rarely join their post-shift gossip sessions. I don't have the energy for it. They see my quietness as aloofness, my focus as a lack of personality. They don't know that my mind is always running calculations. Did that table tip enough to cover the new prescription for Nana? Can I stretch this paycheck to the end of the month if I only eat ramen for the last 3 days? The manager, Monsieur Dubois, is a man perpetually on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He exploits my desperation, knowing I'll take the extra shifts, the undesirable holiday rotations, the tables with notoriously difficult clientele. I can't afford to say no. I am trapped by my love for my grandmother, shackled by the ever-increasing cost of keeping her comfortable in a world that discards the elderly with chilling efficiency. 4 days before the night that would change everything, I had visited Nana Rose. She was propped up in her bed, her eyes, once the brightest blue, now clouded with the fog of time and illness. A stroke 5 years ago had stolen her voice, locking her vibrant personality inside a silent prison. But it hadn't stolen her. We had our ways. I learned to read the subtle flicker of her eyelids, the slight twitch of her lips, the way she would tap her finger, once for yes, twice for no. I learned to anticipate her needs, to understand her frustrations, to see the eloquent conversations happening in her gaze. I would sit for hours, telling her about the absurdities of my job, describing the outrageously expensive dishes, and she would listen, her hand in mine, her silent presence a balm to my weary soul. On my way out, the facility's administrator, a woman with a smile as thin as a razor blade, intercepted me. "Miss Thompson," she'd said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, "we need to discuss your grandmother's account. There's an outstanding balance of $4,200 for specialized physical therapy. If it's not settled by the end of the month, we'll have to adjust her care plan." Adjust her care plan. I knew what that meant. Less therapy, fewer comforts, a slow slide into neglect. The number, 4,200 holhalos, was an insurmountable mountain. My bank account held 270 os. I left the facility with her words ringing in my ears, the cold dread coiling in my stomach like a serpent. I smiled and nodded, promising to take care of it, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I had to work. I had to earn. I had to find a way. I had no other choice. Friday night at Aria descended like a meticulously orchestrated storm. The air crackled with the energy of 100 simultaneous transactions of commerce and ego. I was already bone-tired, running on fumes from a double shift the day before, when Monsieur Dubois gathered the staff for the pre-service briefing. His face was paler than usual, his hands fluttering nervously. "Listen, everyone. Tonight, we have a very important guest," he announced, his voice a strained whisper. "Arthur Sterling will be dining with us." A collective intake of breath sucked the air from the room. Arthur Sterling. The name was a legend in New York, a titan of industry, a modern-day Midas whose portfolio included aerospace technology, real estate, and global logistics. He was worth an obscene number of billions. He was also the man who owned the very building in which we stood. His visits were rare and terrifying. Stories of his exacting standards were staff room lore. Tales of chefs being fired for an oversalted sauce, sommelier dismissed for recommending the wrong vintage. He didn't just demand perfection, he expected it as his birthright. Monsieur Dubois' frantic eyes scanned the room, passing over the more experienced waiters, and landed squarely on me. "Clara, the Sterling table is yours." My stomach plummeted into an icy abyss. A few of the other waitresses visibly relaxed, their relief quickly morphing into smirks of pity aimed in my direction. Jessica, who considered me her primary rival for no reason I could ever discern, leaned over and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Bonne chance, Ghost. Don't get yourself fired before dessert." My hand, holding my notepad, began to tremble, but I forced a nod. What could I do? Protest? Refuse? That was a luxury I couldn't afford. $4,200. The number was branded on the inside of my eyelids. I just had to survive. One table, one night. The arrival of the Sterling party was less an entrance and more of a conquest. A gleaming black Maybach purred to a stop at the curb, and a driver in a crisp uniform materialized to open the door. The first to emerge was not the patriarch, but his eldest son, Julian Sterling. He was probably in his late 20s, dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to have been woven onto his body. He possessed a kind of aggressive, predatory beauty, chiseled jaw, piercing blue eyes, and a smirk that seemed to be his default expression. He scanned the restaurant lobby with the bored disdain of a king surveying a lesser territory. Following him was Arthur Sterling himself. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a mane of silver-streaked hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He moved with an aura of immense, coiled power. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He didn't have to be. His very presence altered the gravity of the room. He was already on his phone, barking curt instructions into it, his attention 1,000 miles away. And then, trailing behind them both, was the boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, small for his age, with a shock of dark hair that fell into his eyes. He clutched a small, intricately detailed model of a futuristic-looking jet in one hand, holding it like a talisman. He seemed entirely out of place, a small, fragile boat adrift in the wake of 2 formidable battleships. I noticed the small, flesh-colored devices nestled behind his ears, hearing aids. They were shown to the prime corner table, a secluded alcove that offered both privacy and a panoramic view of the dining room. Julian immediately began holding court, speaking in a loud, booming voice, clearly enjoying the attention his family's arrival had garnered. Arthur Sterling sat down, never taking the phone from his ear. The little boy, who I learned was named Leo, slid into his chair and placed his model jet carefully on the white linen tablecloth, his world shrinking to the few square inches around his prized possession. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed my apron, and approached the table, my professional mask firmly in place. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Aria. My name is Clara, and I will be taking care of you tonight." Julian glanced up at me, his eyes sweeping over me in a quick, dismissive appraisal. "We'll start with the 98 Krug, a Magnum." He didn't ask, he commanded. He then turned to his father, who was still engrossed in his call. "Father, what are you drinking?" Arthur Sterling made a vague, dismissive gesture with his free hand, not even looking up. Julian's smirk tightened. "The Krug it is. And bring a bottle of your finest still water. San Pellegrino is for peasants." His friends, two other young men who radiated the same lazy arrogance, chuckled appreciatively. I turned my attention to the small boy, Leo. He was tracing the wings of his model jet with a fingertip, completely absorbed. I knelt down slightly to bring myself closer to his eye level, a habit I'd developed with Nana. "And for you, young man?" I asked, smiling warmly. "Would you like a lemonade, or perhaps a Shirley Temple?" Leo didn't look up. He didn't react at all. "Don't bother." Julian's voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. "He can't hear you." He said it loudly, with a theatrical flourish, as if announcing a punchline. The two friends snickered again. "He's deaf. Total silence. A broken toy." My smile froze on my face. The casual cruelty of the remark, spoken in front of the child himself, was stunning. I looked at Leo. He must have felt the vibrations of his brother's voice or sensed the shift in energy because he finally looked up. His eyes, a startlingly deep brown, were intelligent and watchful. They darted from his brother's sneering face to mine. In them, I saw a flicker of something I recognized from my grandmother's most frustrating days, a profound, soul-deep loneliness. I straightened up, my heart aching for him. "My apologies," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I addressed Julian. "I will bring the champagne and water right away." As I walked away, I felt Julian's eyes on my back, cold and appraising. This wasn't just a difficult table. This was a minefield. The meal progressed as a masterclass in casual cruelty, orchestrated by Julian and passively enabled by the oblivious Arthur Sterling. When I returned with the champagne, Julian made a grand show of inspecting the bottle, holding it up to the light as if he were a world-renowned expert, before nodding curtly for me to pour. Arthur Sterling remained tethered to his phone, his conversation a low, intense murmur about mergers and acquisitions. Leo sat in his own world, occasionally pushing his model jet across the tablecloth, mimicking its flight path. When it was time to take their food orders, the pattern repeated itself. Julian and his friends ordered the most expensive items on the menu: Wagyu beef, seared foie gras, lobster thermidor, making a series of complicated and unnecessary demands. "I want the steak medium rare, but with a cool red center. If I see a hint of grey, I'm sending it back, and the asparagus should be blanched for precisely 90 seconds. Time it." When I turned to Leo, I made a conscious effort to face him directly, hoping he could read my lips. I spoke slowly and clearly. "What would you like to have for dinner?" Before he could even respond by pointing at the menu, Julian cut in. "He'll have the chicken. Plain, no sauce, and some steamed broccoli. Can't have him making a mess." He waved a dismissive hand. "Now, hurry along." I gave Leo an apologetic smile and retreated. A few minutes later, the boy accidentally knocked his fork to the floor. It landed with a soft clink on the plush carpet. It was a simple, childish mistake. Before I could even take a step towards the table to replace it, I saw Julian, with a subtle, vicious movement, kick the fork further under the table, out of his brother's reach. He then leaned back with a satisfied smirk as Leo looked around, confused, for his missing utensil. It was a small thing, a piece of casual sadism that no one else seemed to notice. Arthur was still on his call. The friends were deep in a loud conversation about yachts. But I saw it, and it ignited a slow-burning fire in my chest. I walked over, a fresh, cloth-wrapped fork in my hand. I knelt beside Leo's chair, catching his eye. "Here you go," I said, my lips forming the words with exaggerated care as I handed it to him. He took it, his small fingers brushing against mine. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that I saw him, that I understood. As the evening wore on, my focus shifted from the demanding adults to the silent child. I watched him. He wasn't just a broken toy. He was incredibly observant. His eyes missed nothing. He watched the way the sommelier decanted a bottle of wine at a nearby table, his gaze following the intricate movements. He noticed when a woman dropped her napkin 2 tables away, long before her husband did. He was taking in the world visually, with an intensity that the hearing world often overlooks. I started to notice other things. He wasn't just randomly playing with his jet. He was examining it. He would turn it over and over, his finger tracing the lines of the fuselage, the joint where the wings met the body. It wasn't the idle play of a bored child. It was the focused study of an enthusiast. It reminded me of the way my grandfather, a retired mechanic, used to handle engine parts with a kind of reverence and deep understanding. Julian's taunts, however, grew more brazen as the champagne flowed. He started a game with his friends, deliberately turning his back to Leo while speaking, making it impossible for the boy to even try and read his lips. Then he would snap his fingers near Leo's ear. "Hello, McFly? Anybody home?" He'd jeer, rewarded by the braying laughter of his companions. At one point, Leo, clearly wanting something, tried to get his brother's attention by tapping his arm. He then made a few gestures with his hands, a cup shape, a tipping motion towards his mouth. It was a simple, universal sign for drink. Julian rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, look, he's doing his little hand dance again. What is it you want, huh?" He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Use your words." I felt a tremor of rage go through me. This wasn't just sibling teasing. This was psychological torture, a systematic campaign to humiliate and isolate his own brother. And his father, the great Arthur Sterling, the man who commanded empires, was utterly, unforgivably blind to the war being waged at his own table. He had finally ended his call, but his attention was now on a tablet, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through spreadsheets. He was physically present, but emotionally a ghost. The final, irrevocable line was crossed over dessert. The pastry chef had sent out a complimentary plate of intricate, jewel-like macarons. Leo's eyes lit up, and he reached for a vibrant blue one. As he did, he tried again to engage his father. He picked up his model jet, his most prized possession, and held it out towards Arthur, a hopeful expression on his small face. He wanted to share his joy, to connect, to be seen. Arthur, deep in whatever financial abyss his tablet held, didn't even look up. He just waved a hand dismissively. "Not now, Leo. I'm busy." The light in Leo's eyes died, his small shoulders slumped, and in that moment of crushing rejection, Julian saw his opening. He snatched the model jet from Leo's hand. "Dad's working, you little nuisance," he said, his voice a low snarl. He held the jet aloft, just out of his brother's reach. Leo stood up in his chair, his face crumpling, reaching for his toy. A small, guttural sound of distress escaped his lips, the sound of a child pushed beyond his limit. He began to move his hands rapidly, desperately, forming signs I didn't recognize, but whose meaning was universal. "Please, give it back. It's mine." Julian laughed, a truly ugly sound. "What's all this gibberish? You want your little plane? Ask for it properly." He turned, his eyes sweeping the nearby tables, which had now grown quiet, sensing the escalating drama. He was performing now, and he needed an audience. His gaze locked onto me as I stood frozen a few feet away. He held the plane up higher, a triumphant glint in his eye. "Hey, Waitress, come over here. You seem to think you're some kind of expert on the handicapped." My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to fetch Monsieur Dubois, to disappear. But I couldn't. I looked at Leo's face, streaked with silent tears, a mask of pure anguish. And I saw Nana Rose, trapped behind her wall of silence, her eyes pleading for understanding. I walked toward the table, my legs feeling like lead. Julian's smirk widened. He was enjoying this, savoring the power he wielded. He gestured with his head towards his distraught brother. "Tell him. Tell my deaf brother that if he wants his toy back, he needs to talk. Use his voice. That's what it's for, right? Go on. Talk to my deaf brother." The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the restaurant. It was a direct challenge, a public humiliation, not just of Leo, but of me. Everyone was watching. Monsieur Dubois was hovering near the kitchen door, his face ashen. Arthur Sterling finally looked up from his tablet, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at the disturbance. I ignored Julian. I ignored everyone. I knelt beside Leo's chair, bringing myself down to his level. I didn't touch him. I just waited until his tear-filled eyes met mine. And then, something inside me snapped. The years of quiet desperation, of swallowing insults, of being invisible, of fighting for my grandmother's dignity. It all coalesced into a single point of pure, unadulterated clarity. "No more. He is talking," I said. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Julian's smirk faltered. "What did you say?" I rose to my full height, my 5'5" frame feeling like it was 10 feet tall. I looked directly into Julian Sterling's cold blue eyes. I said, "He is talking. He is communicating. You're just too profoundly ignorant to listen." Gasps rippled through the nearby tables. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You're fired. You have no idea who you're talking to." "Oh, I think I do," I said, my voice gaining strength, fueled by a righteous fury I didn't know I possessed. "I'm talking to a bully, a pathetic, insecure bully who gets his kicks from tormenting a child, his own brother." I turned my back on him, dismissing him completely, and focused on Arthur Sterling, whose face was now a thunderous mask of confusion and anger. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice ringing with conviction, "you're a titan of industry. You build empires. You command armies of people. But you are blind. You are sitting here while your son emotionally eviscerates his younger brother, and you do nothing. You see his disability as an inconvenience, a flaw in your perfect lineage." "How dare you lecture me about my own family?" Arthur started to rise, his voice a low growl. "Someone has to," I shot back, taking a step closer. "Because you're not listening. Not to me, and not to him." I pointed at Leo, who was now watching the exchange, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. You think he's just a silent, broken little boy playing with a toy. You've probably bought him hundreds of them. But have you ever once, for 1 second, actually looked? I turned back to Julian, who was still holding the model jet. You think this is just a toy? You think he's just asking for it back? I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He's doing so much more than that. He's not a nuisance, he's a prodigy. And you're too busy being a monster to see it. Prodigy? He's deaf, Julian spat. And you're an idiot, I retorted, the words sharp and clean. I've been watching him all night, the way he studies things, the focus, the intelligence in his eyes. He hasn't just been playing with that jet, he's been analyzing it. His hands. He's not just signing, "Give me my toy." It's more complex than that. It's specific. I looked at Leo, then at the model, then at his father. The pieces clicked together in my mind, a culmination of every little observation I had made that night, filtered through the lens of my years communicating with Nana. "That model," I said, my voice dropping, but carrying an intensity that held the entire room captive. "It's not from a store, is it, Mr. Sterling? The design is too advanced. The swept wing configuration, the engine placement. It looks like a prototype, like something from Sterling Aerospace." Arthur Sterling froze, his hand halfway to grabbing my arm. His eyes flickered from my face to the model in Julian's hand. For the first time all night, I had his complete, undivided attention. His hand signs, I continued, the revelation hitting me with the force of a physical blow. He keeps touching his 2 fingers together and then making a sweeping motion outwards, right over the engine housing. He's trying to tell you something about the heat shielding or the thrust vectoring. He's pointing out a detail, a flaw or an innovation. I don't know which. He's not asking for his toy. He's trying to talk to you about your work. He is using the only language he has to show you that he understands, that he is your son, and you have been ignoring him all night. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Arthur Sterling slowly, deliberately, took the model jet from Julian's slackened grip. He turned it over in his large, capable hands, his eyes tracing the exact spot I had described. His face, that impenetrable granite mask, seemed to crumble. The anger was replaced by a look of dawning, catastrophic horror. It was the look of a man realizing he had been staring at a masterpiece and seeing only a smudge. He looked at Leo, truly looked at him, for what felt like the first time. Leo stared back, his tear-streaked face full of a desperate, heart-breaking hope. Then Arthur Sterling turned his gaze on his eldest son. The disappointment in his eyes was so profound, so cold, it was more terrifying than any shouted rage. "Get up, Julian," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Father, she's just a waitress. She's lying," Julian stammered. "I said," Arthur repeated, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "Get up. You and your friends will leave, now. Your access to all company accounts has just been suspended. We will talk later." It was not a suggestion. It was an execution. Julian paled, his arrogance vanishing like a ghost at sunrise. He and his friends scrambled from the table and fled the restaurant. A wave of a strange, ringing silence descended, thicker and heavier than the stunned hush that had preceded it. It was the sound of a vacuum, the void left behind by the sudden and violent ejection of Julian Sterling's colossal ego. His chair was askew, a napkin crumpled on the floor beside it like a fallen flag. Whispers slithered through the dining room, the patrons' faces a gallery of shock, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. Monsieur Dubois looked as though he might faint, his hand pressed to his chest, his starched white uniform the only thing holding him upright. Arthur Sterling, a man who moved markets with a word, sat utterly still, as if the force of my outburst had turned him to stone. The exquisite model jet, his late wife's legacy, rested in his hand, not as a piece of technology, but as a holy relic he had just discovered, was desecrated. He stared across the vast white expanse of the table at Leo, and in that moment, the carefully constructed edifice of the Billionaire crumbled. I saw not a titan, but a man drowning in a sea of his own making, finally realizing the water was over his head. Then, his gaze, slow and deliberate as the turning of a planet, found me. I was still standing, my body thrumming with the last violent echoes of adrenaline. A terrifying cold was seeping into my limbs, the kind of cold that comes after a fever breaks. I had just detonated a bomb in the center of my own life. The shrapnel would tear through everything, my job, my future, any hope of paying for Nana's care. The $4,200 wasn't a mountain anymore. It was a black hole, and I was falling into it. My righteous fury had been a brief, glorious flame. Now only the ash of consequence remained. "You," he said. His voice was a rasp, a grinding of rocks. "What is your name again?" "Clara, sir," I managed, the word tasting like glass in my mouth. "Clara May Thompson." He held my gaze for a lifetime, his eyes not angry, but unnervingly clear, as if he were looking straight through my uniform, through my skin and bones, and weighing my very soul. "My office, Sterling Tower, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Don't be late." It was not an invitation. It was a summons. He then turned back to Leo, placing the jet gently on the linen in front of him. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he rested it on his son's small shoulder. The gesture was clumsy, foreign, but it was a beginning. I was left standing in the wreckage, an architect of chaos, the focal point of 100 astonished stares, my career a smoking crater at my feet. Sleep was a foreign country I could not enter. I lay in my 5th-floor walk-up, the familiar sounds of the building, the groaning pipes, the muffled arguments from next door, the distant wail of a siren, all sounding like a prelude to my own doom. I replayed the scene in my mind on an endless, torturous loop. Each time, my own voice sounded shriller, my accusations more reckless. I saw the blood drain from Julian's face, the glacial fury in Arthur Sterling's eyes. This 9 o'clock meeting wasn't for a severance package, it was for a public execution. A man like Arthur Sterling didn't just fire people, he erased them. I would be blacklisted, rendered unemployable, a cautionary tale whispered among the city's service staff for years to come. Remember the waitress who thought she could lecture a god? At 3:17 a.m., the 4 walls of my apartment began to feel like a shrinking coffin. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the nursing home. Maria, the night nurse with a perpetually tired but kind voice, answered. "Maria, it's Clara Thompson," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I know this is a crazy request. Could you please just go to my grandmother's room and put the phone next to her ear? I won't say much, I just need her to hear me." There was a pause, and then the gentle rustle of her uniform. "Of course, dear. Give me a moment." I heard the soft squeak of her shoes on linoleum, a gentle murmur, and then the distinct, rhythmic sound of Nana Rose's breathing filled my ear. It was the sound that had lulled me to sleep as a child, the steadiest metronome in my chaotic world. Tears I hadn't known were left began to stream down my face, hot against my cold skin. "Hi, Nana," I choked out. "It's me. I think I've made a terrible mess of things. I got so angry tonight. I saw this little boy. He was so alone, Nana, and they were so cruel to him. He was trying so hard to be seen, just like you do. He was talking with his hands and his eyes, and no one was listening. And I made them listen. A sob escaped, raw and ragged. I yelled at a very powerful man, and now I'm going to lose everything. The job is gone. I don't know how I'm going to pay for the therapy, for your room. I'm so scared. I'm so sorry I failed you. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as if I could absorb her strength through the plastic. I listened to the quiet, even cadence of her breath, in and out, a silent reassurance that the world, despite my best efforts to shatter it, was still turning. In her silence, I found a sliver of peace, a tiny anchor in the storm. The next morning, I dressed for my execution. I chose my only interview blouse, a pale grey silk blend that had cost a week's worth of tips, and a pair of black slacks. Each movement was heavy, deliberate. The subway ride downtown felt like a descent into the underworld. Sterling Tower was not a building. It was an act of dominance over the sky, a monument of obsidian glass and polished steel that scorned the lesser structures around it. The lobby was a cathedral of capital, vast and cold, the air smelling of money and marble. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft clicks of expensive shoes on the floor. When I gave my name to the receptionist, a woman who looked like she had been sculpted from ice, her perfectly arched eyebrow rose a fraction of a millimeter. It was the only sign of surprise she allowed. Without a word, she gestured towards a single, unmarked elevator. Penthouse. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, my stomach plummeting with every floor we climbed. It opened not into a reception area, but directly into Arthur Sterling's office. The space was breathtaking and terrifying. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. It was the view of a god from his mountain, the city sprawling below like a toy set. Arthur Sterling was not behind the gargantuan desk that dominated one side of the room. He was standing by the window, his back to me. On a pedestal beside him, illuminated by the morning sun, was the model jet. And in a corner, sitting at a child-sized table with a sketchbook and a galaxy of colored pencils, was Leo. He looked up as I entered, his dark eyes wide. He hesitated for a second, then gave me a small, shy wave. My heart clenched. "Miss Thompson." Sterling's voice, amplified by the room's acoustics, made me jump. He turned, and the man before me was not the same one from the restaurant. The Titan was gone, replaced by someone older, more fragile. His suit was impeccable, but his face was etched with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed by a sleepless night that had clearly been far worse than my own. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a leather chair that faced his desk. "Please, sit." I perched on the edge of it, my hands gripping my purse so tightly my knuckles were white. This was it. The verdict. He didn't sit. He began to pace, a caged lion in his own palatial zoo. "You called me blind last night, Miss Thompson. It's a word that has been echoing in my head for the last 12 hours. He stopped and faced me, his gaze piercing. "You were not wrong. One can build an empire, see a decade into the future of global markets, and be utterly blind to what is happening across a dinner table." He walked over to the model jet, his fingers hovering over its surface without touching it. "My wife, Elena, designed this. She was the soul of this company, our greatest innovator. She saw things no one else could. Leo has her mind. He has her eyes." His voice grew thick with an emotion he quickly suppressed. Elena was his bridge. She learned to sign before he was even diagnosed, just in case. She said it was just another beautiful language. When she died, the bridge collapsed, and I, in my arrogance and my grief, did not think to learn how to build a new one. I hired tutors, therapists, audiologists. I tried to fix him, to make him fit my world. It never once occurred to me that I should be the one to enter his. He finally moved to his desk and sat, the sheer size of it creating a chasm between us. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. You, on the other hand, you built a bridge in 5 minutes with nothing but observation and empathy. You didn't see a defect. You saw a mind at work. You saw my son. He paused, and the silence stretched. I spent an hour last night with the lead engineer on the Chimera project, the full-scale version of that jet. Leo was, as you correctly deduced, pointing out a potential structural weakness in the turbine housing's heat baffling, an oversight that could have caused catastrophic failure at Mach 3, an oversight that a team of the world's best aeronautical engineers missed. A 7-year-old boy found it. The scale of it, the reality of it, left me breathless. I had thrown out the word prodigy as a rhetorical weapon. It was a literal, staggering truth. Which brings me to you, he continued, his tone shifting from reflective to sharply analytical. It was the voice that closed billion-dollar deals. I don't believe you did what you did last night out of a desire for personal gain. Your file? Yes. I had my head of security compile one. Suggests you live a life of extreme financial precarity. A calculated person would have stayed silent. So tell me, why didn't you? It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. He wanted to understand the data point that didn't fit his models. I thought of Nana, of her tapping finger, of the frustration in her eyes when her mind was sharp, but her body was a cage. Because silence isn't always empty, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Some silences are full of things that need to be said, and ignoring them is a kind of cruelty. My grandmother, a stroke took her voice years ago. I've spent the last 5 years learning to listen to her silence. I learned to see the conversations in her eyes, the arguments in the tension of her hands. When I looked at Leo, I didn't see a deaf boy. I saw a person screaming to be heard. I couldn't just stand there and let you all ignore him. He nodded slowly, a deep, resonant sound. You see value where others see a void. He opened a drawer and removed a corporate checkbook. My blood ran cold. The hush money. The final insult. He wrote, signed his name with a sharp, decisive flick of the pen and slid the check across the polished mahogany. My actions last night, and for the last 3 years, put you and my son in an untenable position. This is not payment. It is restitution. My eyes fell on the paper. It was made out to the Northwood Skilled Nursing Facility. The amount was for $100,000. It was an impossible number, a figure from another universe. It was safety. It was dignity. It was the end of the fear that had been my constant companion for years. A strangled sob caught in my throat. But that is not why I asked you here, he said, his voice pulling me back from the brink. A person with your unique skill set is wasted pouring champagne. You possess a form of intelligence that cannot be taught in business school. I am restructuring my family's philanthropic endeavors. I am creating a new entity to be called the Elena Sterling Foundation. Its sole mission will be to identify, fund, and cultivate innovations in non-verbal communication, and to provide resources for gifted children whose brilliance is overlooked because of physical disability. He leaned back, his eyes locking onto mine. I am not offering you a job, Miss Thompson. I am making you a proposal. I want to hire you as the Foundation's first Director of Acquisitions. Your job will be to find the people no one else is listening to. To find the Leos of the world. You will have an unlimited budget and a full staff. Your only mandate is to find them and give them a voice. You will report directly to me. The room seemed to tilt, from waitress to director, from Queen's walk-up to penthouse suite. It was too much, a fairy tale so absurd it felt like a hallucination. Mr. Sterling, I don't have a degree. I have an associate's in liberal arts. I know nothing about running a foundation or aeronautics or— You know how to listen, he interrupted, his voice cutting through my panic. It is the single most valuable and rarest skill on this planet. I can hire 100 people with PhDs and MBAs. I can't hire another you. The rest is just paperwork. We will teach you. He glanced over at his son, who was now looking at us, his pencil still. A slow, genuine smile transformed Arthur Sterling's face. In fact, your first assignment is to find the best American Sign Language instructor in the country. They will be tutoring 3 pupils. Myself, you, and Leo will be our teaching assistant. My first 2 months were a blur of exhilarating terror. I moved from my cramped apartment into a clean, bright corporate flat downtown, a place so quiet I had trouble sleeping. I swapped my black uniform for tailored suits that felt like costumes. I sat in boardrooms, surrounded by people who spoke a language of acronyms and financial projections, feeling like a spy behind enemy lines. I suffered from a crippling case of imposter syndrome, convinced that at any moment someone would tap me on the shoulder and ask me what I was doing there. But then there were the afternoons. 3 times a week, I would join Arthur and Leo in a quiet conference room with Dr. Elaine Vick, a brilliant, dynamic ASL professor from Gallaudet University. In that room, the hierarchy of Sterling Tower dissolved. We were 3 beginners, fumbling with the beautiful, complex geometry of a new language. Arthur, the master of the universe, was often clumsy, his large hands struggling to form the delicate signs. He would get frustrated, but he never quit. Leo, in his element, was a patient and joyful teacher, his face lighting up when his father or I finally mastered a new phrase. It was in those sessions that the real healing began, as they built their new bridge, sign by painstaking sign. I visited Nana every other day. With the Foundation's first, unofficial grant, she was moved to a private suite in a facility that looked more like a resort than a nursing home. She had the best therapists, the most attentive nurses. The fog of despair that had clouded her eyes for so long began to clear. I would sit with her, telling her about my strange new life and practicing my new signs, my hands shaping words in the air for her. One afternoon, after I signed a story about Leo, she lifted her own frail hand and, with immense effort, curled her fingers into the sign for love. It was the first word she had spoken in 5 years. 6 months after that fateful night at Aria, Arthur called me. "Clara," he said, his voice relaxed, warmer than I had ever heard it. "We're taking the Chimera up for its first fully crewed test flight this afternoon. Leo is co-piloting from the ground station. He was very specific. He wants you in the control room with us." The control room was a hive of quiet, focused energy. Leo sat at a console, his small face a mask of intense concentration, his hands flying across a specialized interface. Arthur stood behind him, a hand on his son's shoulder, a mirror of the gesture from the restaurant. But this time it was natural, full of a fierce, boundless pride. On the massive screen before us, the jet, a silver embodiment of his mother's dream, tore a hole in the sky. After the successful landing, as the crew cheered, Leo swiveled in his chair and looked up at me. His hands began to move, not with the frantic energy of the desperate boy in the restaurant, but with the fluid grace of an artist. Arthur smiled, watching him, then looked at me. He didn't translate. He didn't need to. I had become fluent in this new language. You heard me when I was just making noise. Leo signed. Now we can fly. I knelt down, my eyes level with his, the vast sky visible through the window behind him. I brought my hands up and answered him in the language we now shared. You always knew how to fly, Leo. You just needed someone to see it. Standing there, between the father and the son, a silent conversation flowing between the three of us, I finally understood. The power of Arthur Sterling wasn't in his billions or his skyscrapers. It was in his eventual willingness to learn a new language. My own value wasn't on a resume or a degree. It was in my ability to listen to the spaces between words. I hadn't been saved from my life that night. I had been given the chance to build a new one, not from money or status, but from the simple, revolutionary act of paying attention. I had been the ghost, a girl who existed in the margins. Now I was a translator, not of languages, but of people, and in helping a father and son find their way back to each other, I had finally, fully found myself.